Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show of the Western Standard. It is Thursday, October the 16th. With me today is my friend and colleague, Chris Oldcorn, who has been actually attending to the opinion pages since I sort of retired a couple of months ago and doing an excellent job. Chris, I see the numbers every day, and you're doing great. So you're also a pretty skilled writer in your own right and paying attention to the things that matter. And you had an editorial in the Western Standard I think it was yesterday, and it drew attention to a really oddball situation that has happened, where we have the federal government having claimed responsibility for pipelines when it's to their advantage, now just sort of, go and sort it out among yourselves. The article I'm talking about is E.B. can't, that would be the BC Premier, E.B. can't veto a nation-building pipeline. What's going on, Chris?
Yeah, well, when Carney came in, he talked about this major projects office, which is now up and running. They picked their first 5 projects, most of which were actually already well on the way to completion, but at least they're doing something. And obviously, Danielle Smith, the Alberta Premier, has been asking for another pipeline. She wants it obviously to be one of the major project office projects that they have going on, and has started the process of that. The Alberta government's going to pay the first little bit of the work that needs to go in before a private investor would come in. However, BC Premier David Eby calls it basically a dream and it's never going to happen. And he also says it's not allowed to come into BC, which he can't do because it's a federal project as soon as you go over a provincial line.
You've seen this movie before, haven't we, with the Trans Mountain Expansion Line?
Yes, and they went all the way to the Supreme Court, and BC lost. The BC attempted to stop the Trans Mountain pipeline. So even the Supreme Court
is really pumping it, like that got finished and is pumping oil, right?
That's correct. Yeah. The last numbers I saw on the Trans Mountain pipeline is that it is operational, depending on who you listen to, anywhere from 25 to 80% capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't really been too forthright with the exact numbers going through, but I've heard numbers anywhere from 25 to 80% of the max capacity of what the Trans Mountain pipeline can pump through it. So in other words, we do need another pipeline. It's not going to take much to fill up the Trans Mountain pipeline and need a second one. And especially if we want to get our oil out of Canada and the US, because right now, 96% of what we pump out of the ground goes to the US, and we're not even getting the market price for it because they know that we can't sell it to anybody else. We need to be able to create competition by being able to export to Asian nations. And right now we can't. I mean, what we have, we put on rail and into the Trans Mountain, but it's not enough. We definitely need a second pipeline, especially for the economic development of the country, particularly the West. These are good middle-class paying jobs.
Now, it seems to me, Chris, that we actually, back 10 years ago, there was a second pipeline approved. It was called Northern Gateway, and it was going to go out to the West Coast, up around Prince Rupert.
Okay.
And then the new federal government under Justin Trudeau deep-sixed that. It was fully approved, fully permitted, but they just arbitrarily canceled it. Then we had a number of other pipeline projects fall off the table because, frankly, the federal government didn't want them to happen. And then we had the No Pipelines Bill, the famous Bill C-69.
Mm-hmm.
And we had another bill, which is still in force, that makes it illegal for tankers to show up off the West Coast.
Yes.
There isn't a comparable law banning tankers from the East Coast, but there is from the West Coast. Now, that law is still in place. The No New Pipelines law is still in place. So what is the game plan that Premier Smith is following here in demanding to reopen the old Northern Gateway route, essentially?
Well, I think it plays to her advantage politically since the energy sector is massive for Alberta, and they export most of it. So it's in their advantage to be able to get more out of the ground, take it out faster. I mean, we're not going to run out of oil in Canada for 100 plus years, if not longer. And we can, if we get more oil out of the ground, it creates more jobs, it creates more taxes that get collected that then can be spent on things like healthcare and stuff. But when
Well, I
we
get
have
that, Chris, but at the moment, you still can't back up a tanker to the dock and take on a load. So, do we not have to clear those legislative obstacles first?
possibly, I mean, this Premier Smith could be playing the angle of if she creates enough momentum, it would force the federal government to have to move. So if she gets someone who's willing to come in here and build the pipeline and pay for it all, and she can make an economic case for it, then she might be able to get enough pressure on both the BC government and the federal government for them to back off some of their anti-oil policies. And Premier Smith has even talked about, being carbon neutral and all this other stuff for pipelines too. So she's even trying to appease the environmentalists who think that, carbon is the worst thing ever. And at the same time, she can get her pipeline built, which would provide plenty of jobs, not just in Alberta, but also in Saskatchewan as well.
And so, what is the point that Mr. Eby seems to be stuck on? That he says there couldn't possibly be a case, so don't even try. Where's he coming from on this?
That's a great question. Other than maybe it plays well for him politically by trying to block a pipeline, but it doesn't play well for him economically because it would create jobs in BC as well. And for Eby to be against it from the very beginning, like not even willing to hear out the people who want to invest in this, maybe behind private doors. They're not going to come out publicly yet, but he's not even, he's basically saying don't even try, which the argument that you shouldn't try something just because there's a premier against it that doesn't fall under his purview is completely ridiculous. This is something that should be regulated by the federal government. It shouldn't be regulated by Alberta or BC. This should be done through the Canada Energy Regulator. That's what they do, cross-border energy. And this is a pipeline that goes over a border.
But did not our new energy minister, Mr. Hodgkins, just say, go work it out among yourselves?
That's exactly what he's saying. He's telling Danielle Smith to go convince David Eby to let this pipeline go through. And if she can't get his support, then the federal government's not going to support. So in one sense, this government oversteps into provincial jurisdiction where they shouldn't. And then when they're supposed to oversee something in federal jurisdiction, they're abdicating it to the provinces. It's not how our country is supposed to be run.
Well, we could speculate at length of what the hidden motives driving the federal government might be. I'll take one stab at it. I don't think they actually ever want to see any further oil development in Western Canada. And you say?
Absolutely. I was saying this before Carney got elected. I mean,
but they can't come out and say it in so many words because that would look bad.
Correct. So they have to look like, oh, we're trying, but it just didn't happen. And I mean, Carney is essentially Justin Trudeau, just slightly older. But the policies that he's been following are basically essentially the same. And that includes the environmental policies of the former government, former prime minister. And we're not seeing any real change at the top of the country when it comes to pipelines and when it comes to the West in particular. Carney played up the fact that he announced his campaign in Edmonton and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, he is basically been out of the country for over a decade. And prior to that, he was the Bank of Canada governor. But he got parachuted into Canada for this election, more or less, to try and save the Liberals and get them back in again, which he did. But he also campaigned on being pro-business. He tried to steal some of the stuff that the Conservatives were saying. And then he gets in and his words are not matching what he was saying. As a matter of fact, almost every bill that's been introduced since the Carney came back in, officially was elected as prime minister, none of them have really been any use to the West. And this is another example of something that's completely not useful to the West when the energy minister won't even do his job and sidesteps the federal responsibility of managing cross-provincial border energy, which is a pipeline. And he needs to step in and actually do his job and figure out some way to get EB on board that makes EB happy, makes Smith happy, and the federal government can manage the actual building of that pipeline.
Well, I don't know how much effort it would take or whether we should take to make the Premier of BC happy. There is a legal obligation to accept a pipeline if it is approved by the CER. I don't know what kind of a trade-off that there could possibly be that would be ethical. I want to take you one step back here. There was a meeting of the premiers with the new prime minister in your city, I do believe.
I was up in Saskatoon, yeah. I'm in Regina. It was up in Saskatoon.
He was up in okay. Yeah. Your province, anyway.
Yes. Yep.
Hard to spell, easy to draw. Saskatchewan. So, look, what happened at that meeting that's relevant to this discussion we're having about driving a pipeline through to the West Coast?
Well, at that meeting, they talked about nation building and nation building projects. They hadn't quite announced the Major Projects Office yet, but they had announced at that meeting, and a lot of their discussions were about breaking down interprovincial trade, for example, and then also major projects to get our exports to new countries other than the US, whether it was going to Europe or Africa or going the other direction to Asia, Australia, New Zealand. But to get our products to world markets, which was a word that got said a lot, get our products to world markets, in other words, not the US. And coming out of that meeting, particularly at the press conference at the end of the day, Doug Ford in particular made a comment about how easy it was to deal with Carney compared to his predecessor, and that he was actually confident for once that the federal government was actually going to help provinces get their products out of just going to the US and to going to new markets, because we have markets that want our stuff. It's just we can't get it to them. And that is where the issue is how do we get what we have to those world markets? And the only way to do it is off of our East Coast and our West Coast. And if the West Coast isn't playing ball, but the East Coast is, guess what? That actually is a disadvantage to Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular, because it takes a lot to get oil from Alberta all the way to the East Coast, which is basically next to impossible, because there is no pipeline to go through Quebec either. So the only way to actually get our stuff to large markets like Asia, we're talking billions of people here, is to get it off the West Coast. But if you got a tanker ban and a no pipeline bill, that's going to be next to impossible. And we are literally saddling future generations with debt that they shouldn't have to be saddled with, because we would have more money flowing through the system, which would create less deficits because we'd have more money to pay for stuff. And this government seems intent on running massive federal deficits and not doing the things that would make Canada wealthy.
So, Chris, at the end of that meeting, Premier Smith came out and talked about a grand bargain.
Mm-hmm.
What was the bargain?
They didn't say specifically what the grand bargain was, but it did look like whatever happened behind closed doors, there was something that was going to happen. It looked like, and I'm speculating here, but it looked like they were going to have a pipeline to the West Coast. She seemed somewhat confident in that. And then also ways to get our stuff out through the Arctic through Churchill, Manitoba.
They did indeed talk about that, but they also talked about something else, decarbonized oil.
Yes.
And now, down the road from where you are, you've got Weyburn, which has demonstrated over more than 20 years, in fact, I think it's almost 25 years, that you can take carbon dioxide, compress it, push it down a hole, effectively bury it under very high pressure. The purpose of that experiment was actually to retrieve the last oil enhanced oil recovery is what they were calling it.
Yep.
But in recovering something like another 100 million barrels, they actually demonstrated that you could capture and sequester carbon.
Yes, we even have a coal plant in Saskatchewan that's carbon capture.
Okay, so now I thought that the grand bargain was that you could have new pipelines if they carried decarbonized oil.
Smith has talked about that.
Obviously, it's the carbon in the oil that gives it any value as a fuel. So, we are talking about dehydrated water in a way, but I think the principle is that whatever carbon you burn to extract the oil, you put an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide down the hole and seal it. And there is, in fact, a group in Alberta, the Pathways Alliance, that has been working on this project for some years.
Yep.
Now, my understanding is that the grand bargain would involve taking that technology, applying it on a very large scale, and we know it works from the Weyburn example, but to ramp it up. And that's where things get sticky. What is it going to cost to actually take that much carbon out of the process, pump it underground? I mean, we're talking a couple of million barrels a day.
Yep.
Is this viable, in your opinion? Who is going to want to invest? They're talking about $16 billion in order to sell $20 billion worth of oil. I mean, there's a lot of crazy talk around this, and I'm not sure that this so-called grand bargain has got legs. But how do you see it?
Danielle Smith has, to the best of her ability, tried to appease environmentalists with regards to the pipeline, and whether or not it's economically viable, that will come from a private investor and whether or not they think it is economically viable. Danielle can pitch it and see what happens, but at the end of the day, it's if the dollars don't add up, you won't get an investor. And we have policies in this country that, let's say they got rid of the tanker ban and they got rid of the no pipelines bill. Let's just say Carney woke up one day and decided to actually do something nice for the West. Let's say those two disappear. But let's say we start building a pipeline. You're going to go through at least one, if not two elections before that pipeline is finished. Meaning the government could change and come back in and literally campaign on a no pipeline bill and a tanker ban again. And you could have your pipeline only half built. And then you've wasted all that money. It's the economic uncertainty that is the greatest hindrance in this country when it comes to energy projects. And the fact that we have a government that's hell-bent on net zero, even though, one, net zero is not possible ever. You can't go to zero. So the entire movement is a joke because it's not even possible to get to net zero. But we have a government that has, for lack of a better term, conned people in particularly Eastern Canada that somehow we're the greatest polluters on the planet. Even though we are probably the least polluters on the planet. I mean, I saw a study just the other day that showed that if Canada and the US went completely dark, we would have almost zero change on the global environment. Like, that's how little we already put out, because we're already using environmental techniques both in Canada and the US to appease environmentalists on energy projects and so on. So this is this is once again, the federal government needs to actually step in, do their job, build the pipeline, and make sure that there's certainty for an investor to be able to come in and spend that type of money. Because you're not going to get an investor if you're not going to be willing to be long-term open to whatever it is that they're going to invest in.
To the best of your knowledge, Chris, is the oil that's imported from offshore into Eastern Canada required to be decarbonized in this way?
I'm not sure. I've never heard that it was. I've only ever heard the West talk about it.
I strongly suspect that there is no such requirement because when you're talking about places like Nigeria and Russia, they don't have the technology to compress carbon dioxide and pump it underground, even if they did. So even if they wanted to. So I have a feeling that we've got, again, one of these problems of confederation where the West is getting treated differently. Yes, you can have a new pipeline, but you have to decarbonize the oil in the East. No such requirement exists. Eastern oil is cheaper. There's this big cost that is imposed upon Western Canadian oil. And then, of course, you're supposed to go out and sell it on the export market, which is, of course, where Eastern Canada is buying its oil from. You know, the whole thing goes round and around. I strongly doubt that the economics are going to support this. And then if it happens, it'll be supported by the taxpayer, not by private enterprise. But I could just be a bit of a Jeremiah on this. Do you have any optimism to give us here as we talk about the Premier of BC and the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Alberta trying to make this thing work?
I think there's only one of those three people trying to make this work. And I think the other two are just simply passing the buck to each other. And I don't think Carney has any intentions of ever building a pipeline. And I think he's going to use EB to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then going the other direction into Manitoba, he'll use Wab Canoe to make sure that no pipeline goes through Manitoba up to Churchill.
So you're a pessimist?
Realist.
Unfortunately, it's usually the realists usually turn out to be pessimists, don't they?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Unfortunately, in this country, especially when it comes to energy.
We'll leave it to the viewers to make the judgment. But Chris, you're doing a great job back there in Saskatoon and in Regina, and thank you so much for coming on the program today and explaining what Mr. Eby is up to and why he shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks for having me.
All the best.
You too.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.